the 7 dimensions of conscious leadership. And really, what I'm going to do is to explore um, where leadership has come from and where I think it needs to go. So I'm going to start with a statistic. I'm sure most of you know this. It's something like 70% of all change efforts fail to achieve their target impact. And it's really not so many people's fault that this is happening this way. It's the way things are set up. And that's, as I say here, it's mainly because of behaviors getting in the way. You'll see the percentages here. And at the same time, if initiatives are focused on shifting mindsets and attitudes, then all of a sudden, the chances of success are so much better improved. So, mindsets and behaviors. Why is this important now? Well, I think the traditional leadership models are failing to adapt. I'll probably mention this a number of times in various guises, but what's going on in America now has thrown so many people because they don't know how to handle a change intervention that has just taken everybody by surprise. It's really um, in French you'd say bouleversant. It's throwing people all over the place. AI is creating change wherever you go. I had an email today saying that there were X 100,000 businesses in the UK that were looking to adopt AI and they didn't quite know how to do it. Well, it is definitely creating change in all sorts of ways, and it ain't hardly started yet. So it's having an enormous impact. Social structures, I think a lot has been highlighted by the pandemic and the effect of the pandemic and how people have reacted to it during the pandemic and also the aftermath, which is still being dealt with. People have got long COVID, which is one thing which really hasn't been sort of acknowledged properly yet. But also, just so many people were just taken into just a state of fear, and a lot of the people haven't recovered from that. They haven't got out of it, and so the way that we lead has got to evolve. It's got to change to help people like that. There's obviously the drive to ecology, sustainability. We're in a very political world now where the movement of people is so significant. And yet, 10 years from now, what we've got now is nothing compared to what we're going to have in terms of population movements. And this is all in a time when governments throughout the world are trying to put up their borders. And that's a kind of paradox, which is going to, well, it's going to have to resolve somehow, but it's going to be tough. The education system, certainly in this country, and I would venture to say certainly in the US as well, is not setting up leaders for the future. Uh, there's lots of good initiatives around the place, but leaders need a lot of the skills that I'm going to be covering, and our education systems aren't setting them up for that. Financial markets are in constant flux, and that really leads to a lot of insecurity and again a kind of anxiety and fear. And things really are coming to the boil in so many places, in so many ways. So all of this means that we as leaders have got to be better resourced to handle the situation and to be able to support the people who look to us for leadership. So we need new ways, and we're in a hurry. So let's look at this. I've called a journey from the old to the new, and I'm going to talk about the dimensions of conscious leadership. But as I go through these are not totally distinct. They're very much intertwined with each other. And so, as we look at these things, I may use the same words to cover various ones of these. I think they're distinct elements, but it's like having a big ball of wool and they're all intertwined with each other. So the first one, the old to the new. There will come a day not too long from now when people will say, "What is that thing?" Yeah, the good old telephone, and that it is the traditional approach, and it always reminds me of the fact that it was back in 1911 that Frederick Winslow Taylor wrote his thesis, "The Principles of Scientific Management." And those principles really are still being taught in a lot of business schools, certainly being taught in colleges and schools, and they're being lived out in many places. And I mean, it is extraordinary what's going on in the world right now, but you can see there's a big shift, a big push going on to get back to this kind of leadership, which in my book is a it's a reflection of the dying throes of this old way of being. By the way, do put if you have reactions or thoughts, do put them in the chat. It'd be great to have a bit of a conversation as we go along. So, what's the new way? I've used this sort of diagram just to show things are complex now. You can't have linear thinking, A to B, black, white, whatever it is. The binary thinking really just doesn't do it anymore. So we've got to be much more adaptive and flexible. We've got to be able to embrace complexity, and for that, it means that we can't know all the solutions. And then there's going from the individual to the systemic. And the example I always like to use here is we are systems. Our bodies are systems. Our organizations are systems. We live in a nature which is a system, an incredibly complex system. But the old way of doing things was to just say, oh, here's a problem. Let's find a solution. And in finding the solution, what organizations typically do is they in that solution there are the seeds of a series of other problems. And the reason for that is because we're not looking at the system as a whole. So we've got to understand the wider picture. And if you like, the example I often use is of our own bodies. If you get a problem in your knee, for instance, just for instance, and you go to the doctor will give you some creams or whatever, and eventually he'll say, well, you need to go to a surgeon because they need to do something. They need to intervene in some way. And yet the problem is not in the knee at all. The problem is actually in the back. And maybe you've got a disc that's slightly out, and your body is making an attempt to be as upright and as healthy as it can, but that puts pressure on the knee. And so you're never going to solve the knee problem until you look at the back. And that is this sense of looking at things systemically. Traditional leadership is based on our conditioning, really. It's our habits that have formed through our life. We have automatic reactions to certain things. And it's not a well, it's unconscious, and that's the difficulty. And so what we need are people who can make intentional choices. They can be aware of the patterns that are driving them. What are the patterns that are driving me? Why do I react in a particular way to a particular somebody saying something particular to me? Am I making decisions that are actually mindful, aware of a wider environment, if you like, and then going from the outer to the inner? It's interesting looking at and speaking with some recruiters recently, and there's this kind of dichotomy between organizations that want to hire because they want a skill and organizations who hire because they want a particular human being who can learn the necessary skills. And so still there's this drive to have, I need the technical expertise, I need the skills and so on. But actually, we need different people who can fit into an organization, but in a not necessarily in such a comfortable way. We need intuitive wisdom. We need people to be able to be aware of themselves, as I've said, and this sense of self-awareness, which for me is one of the fundamentals of leadership for the future. It's self-awareness. Lots of people are data driven. It's amazing when you look at the NED world, the non-executive director world. Everybody wants an accountant. They want people who can understand the numbers and run the books. And of course, that's important. You've got to understand what's going on in the business from a numbers point of view. The trouble is that what that does is to cut out an awful lot of the human aspects. And the more that we develop, the more complex things become, the less helpful data in its pure form becomes. What we need are people who can access their inner wisdom. They understand the effects on people. I um I I was called in some years ago to an organization that had been taken over by an accountancy company, and they went in there and all the people who didn't look like them, the accountants, they fired. And what it did was to completely skew the thinking in the business. All the creatives, all the ones who are probably a bit difficult to manage from an emotional or behavioral point of view, they got rid of them all. And within 9 months, the business failed. You need a mix. You need a mix. And there's still this push for a level of rationality, which actually is very destructive. So that's the kind of disconnected leadership that I'm talking about. It leads to a lot of stress. And what it leaves out is that sense of how do I embody things? What is my body saying to me? What is nature saying to me if I go out and just take a walk? We need to be open to the signals of the things that typically we've been brought up to ignore. And now, more and more, because things are so complex, because they're going so fast and changing so fast, we need to be able to have a grounded presence in ourselves, not in anything else. And of course, meditation is a great help for that, for those who have explored it. So, who's power driven around here? The dysfunctional masculine, which you are seeing screaming out of your screens at the moment from the White House, and actually in some ways also from this country. This country does tend to emulate the US in not terribly clever ways. We need more subtlety. We need a healthy mix of the masculine and the feminine. And by that, I'm not talking about men and women. I'm talking about the masculine and feminine attributes or traits, which everybody, we all have. Men, all men and women, we all have a masculine, we all have a feminine aspect. The difficulty today is that so many women have got to the top of organizations by emulating men in order to fit in to organizations and be accepted. And of course, we miss the feminine side. That there are some men with highly developed feminine sides. There are some women with highly developed masculine sides. That's great. That's great. But what is not so great is when people have to suppress parts of themselves in order to fit in, because we miss so much of what they could potentially bring. So those are the 7 dimensions. And as I said, and I think perhaps you can see now how they are very, very much intertwined. So just looking at the downside of this, if people continue to use what I call the old ways, it definitely hinders uh, the right people getting into the boardrooms, particularly women. There are so few women in boardrooms and in the C-suite in organizations, and where they are in the C-suite, they tend to be in HR, legal, and if there's a health and safety, that kind of thing. Whereas actually, they could be occupying proper operational roles, are far more than they are right now. And we need that. We need that balance. Creativity gets stifled largely because of the wielding of fear generating policies and actions. Creativity, innovation, feminine attributes, by the way, that just get squashed. I don't know whether you've ever come across this, but you you go into an organization and you look at the people at the top and you think, how did they get there? And it's a system that tends to promote the wrong people. It tends to promote the people who are going to carry on the the ways of leading, which really have got to, it's got to change. It's got to change. This kind of leadership hampers the best aspects of diversity and inclusion because it tends to squash them. And again, we've seen, I mean, this started, did it start? Well, certainly the Conservative government in this country last year was trying to squash all sorts of diversity and inclusion initiatives, particularly in the civil service. And now Donald Trump has come out and really is really having a go at it. And there's partly, I think, there were an awful lot of organizations that got on the bandwagon, particularly after the murder of George Floyd, and went into organizations and said, "Here, look, we've got the solution for you, all about DEI and B and all of that." They didn't actually produce any particularly useful results. But the fact is that if you have a culturally aware, diverse team, they will be far more effective than a homogeneous team. But I do put in that piece about culturally aware because with the work that we've done with cultural intelligence, what we've seen is that actually, if the team hasn't got any cultural awareness, making them diverse just makes it worse. So there's a subtlety there that we need cultural intelligence and we need diversity and we need the inclusion mindset that brings everybody together. But right now, everybody's trying to scotch that one, and it's a bit sad, really. Stress, burnout is is very big now. Combined with that is a greater awareness around mental health, physical health, which makes the job of the leader that much more difficult. So why not adopt practices, mindsets, attitudes that help people, not make them more stressed and burnt out? Things are significantly oriented around fear. Fear is a remarkable state, if you like, because fear can be a fantastic motivator. It's not always negative. The trouble is that when it's used as to manipulate and that, then that's a big problem. So what do we learn from what I've been through with those seven sort of dimensions? Change is only brought about when it's addressed systemically, and many change initiatives are not approached in this way, which is one of the reasons that 70% of them fail. Welcome, Cliff, by the way. I think the point, Tracy, about fear is that sometimes it can be rather like anger. It can be the motivating force to drive a new behavior. It's definitely not a state to want to stay in, but it can just be that initiator. And certainly, I don't advocate creating fear in order to generate action. It's just that sometimes it has its use, I guess, on a personal level. The core skill of self-awareness is fundamental to leadership for the future. And I put in there listening and presence because I think those are two skills that we need to really practice. Once again, interestingly enough, listening is a feminine trait. It's a skill that an awful lot of leaders, I think, kind of fool themselves a little bit into thinking that they are really good at, whereas actually they're not so hot. Navigating AI, some of that disruption towards sustainability, but I think, you know, when we last had ran this program, we had an AI prompt engineer in the group, and it was fascinating listening to her about the subtleties of AI. But as I've said, we're just at the very beginning of this, and so I think everybody's really got to engage with it. You can't put your head in the sand. I've seen some people who say, "Oh, well, you know, when it's sorted out a bit, I'll engage with AI. Not now. It's too early." A lot of boards of directors are saying this, and I think because it's changing so fast, this is not a train that you can just ignore and say, "Oh, well, there's another one coming along," because it's just everything's speeding up so much. So we have to work with it. We have to work with it. Accessing your inner wisdom and managing fear. I think you can't just get rid of fear. I think in many ways, most of us experience fear, but it's what we do with that, and it's how we manage ourselves within that. Someone once said to me, fear is false evidence appearing real. I think we spend an awful lot of time worrying about things that don't actually happen. So the more that we can be in touch with our inner wisdom, our gut, our heart, the more uh, resilient we become, and actually, the less fear we tend to experience. That's why it's so important, this. financial uncertainty. We have to build a resilience for ourselves. I'm talking about individually, really. I mean, clearly our organizations need to do that, but that's an old skill for them. But I think for a lot of people, it's much more of a new thing dealing with it at a personal level. And social change. Well, there's an awful lot of edicts being made around the world by politicians, and an awful lot of them are not going to stick because the waves of social change now are so big, so great. So, what's the way forward? I think it's about learning about yourself, developing your self-awareness, finding a safe space where you can experiment, where it doesn't matter if you mess up or make lots of mistakes. And it's so great if you can learn from your peers, because then you can make interventions that actually make a difference. Take decisions.
Week after week is we have dedicated space to share, to reflect, and to get some tools. We're not given answers here. We're given questions, and I think that's what I would retain.
So that was one of the delegates on the last program that we ran, and I'm suggesting have a guide, have someone who's worked with many others, run coaching and culture change for a pretty good while, and that's me. So just to say, some of the organisations that I've worked with, that most of which I think you may recognise. So this is leading from within, and this is the program that I've been advocating, and it has it takes place over 10 weeks, consecutive weeks. The next one is every Tuesday and starts next Tuesday, the 18th of February, 7 p.m. UK time. So it's 1 hour per session. And what we do is we do inquiries, breakouts. We work with the material that people bring. There's a bit of homework to do beforehand, not a lot. And there's some videos often to watch and a couple of exercises, but it's not onerous. And one of the beauties, I rather like this webinar today, where we have someone in America, South Africa, in in India, as well as England. And Clef, I don't know where you are, but in just such a small group, Southwest UK. Okay, so two from the UK. We do gather people from all over the place, and the beauty of that is, of course, that we can learn from each other, as I've said. So just to give you an example of the way this works, this is module one, and all of those are the subject headings that we uh, can look at. Clearly, in an hour, there's no way we can do all of that. But what that does is give people the opportunity to bring what's going on for them within the context of these headings. And then we work through in individuals' particular experiences and issues within that context. So the whole thing, we start out by exploring know thyself. And then we look at lead thyself. We look at communication, strategic vision. And it's only then that we start to look out and say, okay, well, what about How do we interface with others? And what goes on in a team? Leadership in the digital age, particularly around AI, social media, thriving amid change. It is possible. And then what makes positive organizational cultures? And finally, we go through a self and peer assessment process, which it takes a little bit longer. That last session is an hour and a half, and each individual assesses themselves in the group, how they've done, where they came from, what they've learned, and what their next steps are. And then the group then gives them the peer feedback. It's a very structured process and very controlled, so that it actually becomes part of what is created really in module 1 and 2, which is a safe space. And as the program develops, people really appreciate that sense of safety, which enables them by the end to be open to some great feedback and people giving great feedback, so that people can learn from it. It's a fantastic process, that. And for those that have attended the program, what we found is certainly increased self-awareness. It's the most important thing, really. They're more centered. They find themselves being more inspiring and attractive others because the way that they come across is more authentic. They're more dynamic. They have explored this sense of their own masculine and feminine and looking at integrating perhaps more of themselves and presenting more of themselves as opposed to suppressing it. They're clearer sighted, and honestly, they're wiser. And it's just because they have greater access to their own inner wisdom. And as someone said, more of anything, everything that you want. And of course, that's completely different for each person. So we have an alumni group on WhatsApp. There's some good conversations there, and people, once they've attended the program, can share issues, ideas, thoughts, and looking for inspiration from their peers. For those that want it, there's an attendance certificate for having done the 10 weeks. And the full price is £725, which includes VAT. But, of course, there's an early bird price, which ends at midnight Pacific time tonight, which is £650, including VAT, for all those that book on the program. So there's a link which I now put in the chat for anybody who wants to. That's the early bird booking link. I invite questions. How is that leaving people? What are you thinking?
I mean, it looks like an excellent course. Yeah, I actually run leadership programs like that. So it's not for me, but it looks like it's really good value. And yeah, and you've covered, I think, some really good aspects of what's missing in leadership. So yeah, I think the more leaders that can do your course, the better.
Well, thank you. Tell your friends.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I run that sort of thing within corporations. So I tend to run it within 4 boards or 4 executives. I work in the housing sector predominantly and local government. So it's always a pleasure to be able to work with clients that allow you to do embodied work and creativity and things like that. So yeah, it's brilliant. But I think I thought I was coming on for a conversation about the challenges of leadership. So forgive me for, but it's been nice to listen to you because it feels like a very healthy place to be.
So we've got 10 minutes if you want to explore, if there are issues of leadership that you're, for instance, tackling in a client environment. I'm certainly open to that, and really within the context of what I've been speaking about. Maybe it's a different paradigm, or it can produce a different way of approaching things.
Well, I think if you look at public sector and housing in the UK, the social housing market is under enormous pressure. And so what tends to happen, what you rightly have said, they move more towards the finance, your side, left brain. At the time when what is needed is more right brain. And it's the irony of, and so I guess that's, and you talking about fear, and what it is fear driven, and so we're looking for more things that are driven from shadow behavior, a need for control, a need to not have any uncertainty, and that's all shadow behavior. So it's the challenge I find is for organizations to create the space to be more working with embodied work and creativity, which is actually much more productive and faster. But for some reason not for a clear reason, they want to stay in what they see as a safe place.
Yes.
And that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yes. Anxiety leads to people seeking safety, and safety in the old mindsets just bogs people down.
Yeah.
It slows everything down.
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. But of course, it's not just housing.
Yeah.
You're very much in that. So that's what you're seeing a lot of. And of course, you're right. But my goodness, we've got it all over.
Okay. Yeah.
We have.
Thomas, interesting what you were doing, and as you know, that I'm also involved in the leadership environment, focusing on the leader himself and the development of the leader, not how he leads, but how he leads himself. Very much so. And a question that came up to me is, who are you actually focusing your program on? Is it leaders out there, or is it coaches or people, even like myself, that might might take your philosophies and use them in my coaching, if I may say so? Who are you actually focusing on? I know that leaders, as well as those being led, should actually go through a program like this in one way or the other, so they can appreciate what it's like to be a leader, what it has to be in terms of yourself, it takes from yourself to be a good leader, and then how much it takes from those that follows. To me, it's one of the bigger issues is that people doesn't know what they really want. Even those that has been led by leaders, they don't know what kind of leader they want. They have probably never in their life really had been led by an efficient leader. I think we don't know that anymore. And if you look at Trump and you're asking yourself, is that a leader? Is that really a leader? It's a leader of one of the biggest economies in the world. And I certainly don't want him as my manager. If he's my manager or my leader, I would make certain that I leave the company as soon as I can. So do we really know what we expect from leaders? And what your course is all about is really people should be aware of, to be led and to be the leader and to be led by. Sorry.
So, Bertie, I think there's a number of points there. As to who's my sort of target avatar, using technical language, we've had retired politicians looking to set up their own organizations. We've had leadership professors from, not plural, from a university. We've had some accountants in organizations who are looking to explore more of the right brain. And I have deliberately kept it very open because I think the diversity of what people bring is so valuable. Interestingly, from an interest point of view, people working in the NHS have featured more than anybody else, the National Health Service in this country,
Yeah.
because they are experiencing such horrific times, completely horrific. And so I would say anybody can benefit from this. The more people who do it, who either aspire to leadership or are in leadership roles, the better, because we need more and more people who have the level of resilience where they can stand their own. I think that the days of people looking up to the leader to lead me from this place to another, that those days are numbered. And in many senses, they're already over. We need to be able to lead ourselves within the
Absolutely.
context of something bigger. And so the sort of the guru mindset, which is very easy to fall back on. We're in trouble. We need a leader, and that's why 52% apparently of Gen Zers in this country are looking for a dictator. They would prefer a dictator rather than a normal prime minister. And of course, Donald Trump really is emulating that. But I do wonder how long it's going to last before it falls in tears. And it may be a while. But I think what it's going to do is to really stir up a sense of the need for a different type of leadership, because the one that's being advocated and lived now is extremely dysfunctional and is going to cause an awful lot of pain, even if it doesn't create another war, which I think is on the cards now. So, and if you look politically around the world, you see the same thing over and over. And so, you know, the
Fully
world
agree.
the world moves in cycles, but this one is going to be a pretty dramatic cycle, I think.
Oh,
So the
no,
more people who
you've
are
got
sufficiently resourced that they can deal with these situations, this uncertainty and fear and anxiety, the better.
thanks for that. I mean, I cannot echo more what you've been saying. Good luck with that, with your course. I mean, it's almost a must do at some stage of your life.
Well, thank you. Yes. Yes. As I said to Tracy, tell your friends.
Yeah, quite right. We need the
Yes.
breakthrough.
Right. Well, we are just coming up to the hour, so I don't know if there's any final points anybody wants to make, but otherwise, I will thank you all for having been here, and the recording of this will be available. And thank you, Cliff, and I will look forward perhaps to seeing you in a different guise at a different time. So, thank you.
Same, yeah. Thanks for your time.
Thanks,
Thom. We really
Thom.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Have a
And
nice
Thank you,
night.
good
Pascal.
night.
Thanks. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
All right.